Okay, welcome everyone. We'll just give it a minute or so for you to sit back, grab a coffee, lunch, some water, sit back and enjoy. Awesome session coming up today on collaborative teamwork. So settle in and we'll get underway very shortly. Okay, we have an awesome session today. This is part of the Best in Procurement webinar series. We'll just give it an extra minute. Mindful it's lunchtime on a Friday. Week is nearly over. The weekend, at least here in Melbourne, looks like sunny, warm one. So we're looking forward to that. To catch a few walks within the limitation of our current restrictions. Okay, let's get cracking. Welcome everyone, and kia ora. My name is Giovanni Ferrante. I'm the marketing manager for CIPS in the ANZ region, and it's my pleasure to be your host for today's session. This webinar is about celebrating excellence in procurement, and it forms part of our Best in Procurement series. It's aimed at showcasing the amazing example of procurement excellence that we have from within the region. So today we'll be talking about collaborative teamwork, and Australia Post is going to share their story that made them successful at our recent award. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I present from today, and this is the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Burrunong people from the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respect to their elders past and present, and extend those respect to all of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people joining us today. I'd also like to acknowledge all of our attendees, communities from New Zealand, and pay my respect to them. Tēnā koutou katoa. Today, as I mentioned, we'll be joined by Robin East, the Head of Procurement for IT and Services, and Diana Klaric, Procurement Category Lead for Australia Post, as they share their winning project that saw them successful at the recent awards. The project is titled Telecommunications Transformation Program, Project Chrysalis or Chrysalis. And it's a great example of a cross-functional teamwork project. The collaborative teamwork category rewards procurement teams that have implemented successful project, for example, a sourcing or a business process improvement initiative, working collaboratively with internal teams or other departments. So before I hand over to Robin and Diana, I'm just going to share a little bit of information around the project. And before that, just a few Zoom housekeeping as per usual. You have an opportunity to interact with our speakers and with the audience through the chat box and the Q&A function. So please let us know where you're from, what you're hoping to learn from today's session by the chat box, and please prepare and submit your questions through the Q&A function. A copy of the recording will be made available, and you'll be able to go back to the recordings and watch it on our YouTube channel and share with your colleagues and peers as well. So a little bit about the project. So in a network overall spanning across 4,300 sites across metropolitan, regional and remote areas, Australia Post embarked on this ambitious telecommunication transformation program, again named Chrysalis or Chrysalis, back in December 2017. By mid-2019, the firm have awarded contracts for the Wi-Fi everywhere approach to post offices, improve network resilience and availability, and 100% digital communication platform. The changes will mean faster parcel processing and improved transaction performance for bank, post and passport application. So previously, Australia Post relied on a single service provider to deliver those services, and a range of networking, contact center and audiovisual services. Through this project, that single source contract was de-risked and split across 4 business sectors, with 2 new suppliers that were added. So competitive commercial activities has delivered significant benefits, which each of the 4 sectors seeing annual cost saving of between 19 and 53%. That is quite impressive. The project, given the size, obviously required an organizational-wide collaboration from senior business leader and specialist subject matter expert to ensure that the whole business approach to sourcing activity was taken, with a senior procurement lead who worked across the entire project, and we'll hear from her directly very shortly. So the procurement team led and managed all the aspects of the supply market engagement and the overall procurement process, ensuring communication between respondents and the project team was seamless. So without any further ado, I'd like to thank Robin and Diana for joining us today and sharing their insights. And over to you. Thank you again for being with us.
Thanks very much, Gio, and thank you to everyone as well for coming to view our webinar. I'll just share my screen there quickly. And almost on cue, my doorbell rang and a postie turned up to deliver a parcel. So that was fortuitous. Let me just make sure I've got the right screen sharing. Yeah, okay, fantastic. So yeah, we just wanted to talk about the journey that we've been through. Myself and Diana will be going through the presentation. Diana was our dedicated procurement resource embedded with the program, and she'll talk about very much the hands-on activities and the effort that went into making this a successful program. So what I'll do is I'll just jump straight into it with what did we do in the first instance. So hold on, let's get this slide deck going. Okay, so the transformation journey. So essentially what we had was the key to the success of the program was really understanding where our key pain points were in the first instance. So way back in 2017, we had some work done on where the telecommunications market was going, where technology was going, what our current agreement looked like, what our current situation was. We had a complex contract which delivered across multiple services. It was on a network, an MPLS network that had been established for a number of years, and it had grown quite complex and inflexible in terms of its ability to change and I guess sort of morph with where technology was going in the future. And so that was really critical in the first instance to identifying what we saw as some problems and what those key opportunities were to making that that transition, that transformation into sort of future-proofing the network and being able to scale and grow as we saw the business needed to grow particularly in the sort of logistics side of the business, the e-commerce world. And so off of that, we obviously created the case for change, and then we were looking to be very clear about what our identified target outcomes for the program were. And so we had a number of kind of goals that were set very early on in the process, and we were very clear about what we wanted to do. And I think, Diana, you were able to talk a little bit more in detail about some of those specific activities there.
Thanks, Rob. In 2017, Australia Post carried out an effectiveness review of its telecommunication services, as Rob mentioned. The primary objectives was to understand the difference between the target state that the organisation wanted and the existing state, and to identify the technology and the service areas that were considered not fit for purpose. And they were also preventing Australia Post from achieving its goals. So Australia Post worked with a consultant to understand the global benchmark pricing for the type of technology required, and this identified the size of the opportunity. This was critical because it helped to obtain the funding for the project team that was stood up, who would then work with the various stakeholders to conduct an RFI and then a more detailed RFP process. So Project Chrysalis was formed, and Chrysalis means the process of transformation. It was tasked with the responsibility of engaging the Australia Post business units and ensuring that any gaps in the telco services scope were properly addressed. The key challenges included network performance, such as there were frequent and sustained service outages that impacted areas of the business that were reliant on the network services. And there were operational limitations that prevented the Australia Post business from introducing new technologies that were already existing in the market. So the services that were under the scope of the initiative included networks, so this included carriage and network services, communication and collaboration, and that included voice, data and video interactions, the contact centre platform, so that included the contact centre functionality for Australia Post staff as well as Australia Post customers, and mobility, so everything to do with provisioning of mobiles, management of those mobiles and connectivity to network services. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Diana. And then obviously, in terms of like having identified what those key factors and opportunities were, what the pain points were, and what the outcomes were that we were looking for, we then sort of progressed to, okay, well, how do we actually make this happen? What do we need to do in order to achieve success in this space? And really, the success of the program was built on a really solid business case. And that business case really detailed the benefits that we were looking to achieve. It was really clear on outcomes, and it really detailed the level of support and how we were going to deliver the program. And I guess tied in with that was the key to having very strong executive sponsorship and buy-in at a senior level. A program such as this, I mean, all up, it was I think it was $80+ million overall in terms of the size of the program. It's a huge program. It's ongoing right now. You know, the activities of the program and what we've launched has enabled us to respond to the challenges of today with COVID and some of the issues we've seen there. So the executive sponsorship and buy-in and the support, which also required funding support for the team. So there's this element of knowing what your benefits are, but having that, locking in that upfront funding that's needed to pull a team together, a cross-functional team across the business and across procurement, finance, legal, external support where needed. You know, there's a huge amount of activity needed, and it needs funding. And so the business case and the executive sponsorship were really critical to that. Having the right team, with the right skill sets, the right kind of people, being comfortable when you know that something's not working, to be brave and make those changes to the team or to the mix. Being really strong communication across the team, regular conversations, embedding the team in its own environment, making sure that it can communicate effectively. They're all critical to the success of the program. And then a robust and proven process. And at Australia Post, we really do have a strong tradition in procurement. We have the organisation has been around for a number of years. It was one of the first organisations set up in Australia from the days, very long days ago. And so the structure and the process that we have for procurement, it's robust, it's proven. We've delivered projects in the past, but also it's flexible. It's able to cater for the flexibility and the changes that you might need through a program of this size, where there are things that you did not foresee, or there are further requirements or clarifications you need to seek. So it was able to deal with the size and the complexity of the challenge, but it was also able to be flexible enough to adapt as more information sometimes came to light. Diana, do you want to just talk through the detail more?
Sure, thanks, Rob. Yeah, it was critical that the program had the right level of governance in place. a steering committee and a project control board were established early on, and they had the right level of representation across the business. There were a number of work areas that were part of those forums. It included community and consumer, which also consisted of retail and contact centres. There was business and government, product and innovation, technology, service delivery and architecture, and they were the prime sponsor of the program, security, procurement, finance, legal, enterprise risk, and HR. So the steering committee and the PCB met monthly, and the program team met weekly to provide regular updates and seek feedback from those key members, and to address that feedback and that input. And each of those members had people working with them on more of the BAU detail, the day-to-day workings of the project. I would say that that level of engagement, and there was a lot of engagement above and beyond that, it does take time, but it is essential to ensure that people are brought in throughout the process, engaged all the way through, that their feedback is considered, and that way it ensured that by the time we got to the end of the process that there was full support for the recommendation. When I first started working with the program team, it was as the RFP was being developed. The program team consisted of a program manager, a project manager, there were business analysts, a project analyst, and there was a networks architect. And it was through the funding that had been sought that they were dedicated resources to the program. And their sponsor was the GM of Enterprise Enablement. And she had a head of in her team who was one of the key subject matter experts who was very valuable throughout the whole negotiation and evaluation process. I started to sit with the program team, and they're on a different level to the procurement team at Australia Post. And I effectively co-located with them while the RFP was in progress. The process from RFP to award, it spanned 12 months, and that doesn't even include what happened prior to that with the RFI and the consultation that was done with the business. And I co-located with that team full-time for around 8 months, and then about 2/3 of my time as we got towards the end of the process. Immersing myself with the team, it was helpful in many ways. I had access to real-time information, and I got those updates as we were working in a very agile, dynamic way. They saw me as another team member rather than just a stakeholder. I thought that the procurement governance was stronger because I was physically present. It was always clear that communications to vendors would go through myself, and that I was always present in those discussions. And it also allowed me to completely focus on the program, which was a big piece of work, and I needed to do that for at least the first 6 months. And then plus there was the added benefit, which we don't have, we don't need to worry about during COVID, but, moving between levels and being close to the meeting rooms where all our meetings were held. The area where Rob and I spoke and thought that, what I needed to watch was that I didn't lose that connection with the wider procurement team. It was a little strange sometimes to go to a monthly procurement meeting and see some people that I hadn't seen for the last month. But then conversely, as I started to transition myself away slowly and spend 1 or 2 days a week in procurement, I think it was strange for the program team. They were so used to me being physically next to them the whole time. We had to work through that. So I think we found the right balance in the end. I think as Rob mentioned, in terms of getting the right team together, that was so important. Something that the business sponsors did really well was that they ensured that the right leadership was in place and that interactions with key stakeholders such as procurement, finance and legal were collaborative. The program manager had a very collaborative style, and she appreciated the need to effectively communicate with all stakeholders. She also had knowledge of procurement, and she understood that even though this was a program of work, that it was actually a procurement piece of work. The RFP was very large, it was very complex, there were many requirements. There were a lot of evaluators to coordinate. In the first phase, there were 37 evaluators. It was effectively 4 large RFPs run in parallel. It needed a lot of hands on deck. The program was led with a culture that if you weren't going to be hands on and a team member, then that money was probably better spent on resources that were the right fit. The difficult decision was made a number of times to transition team members off if productivity was impacted or if the skill set had evolved. And the program was one of the most important pieces of work for Australia Post. So it was important that the team effectiveness remained strong. The program also augmented the team with Accenture resources. They helped to provide procurement telco expertise and also assist with financial modelling. So it helped to fulfil that role that we needed. The roles of the program team members also evolved as we went through. For example, we had a project analyst. Her role evolved into more of an engagement lead role. She started to then engage with the service delivery leads for each of the service towers. So our roles, but one thing remains, our roles were always clear, even as they were evolving. It was also clear that all communications went through myself through procurement, as I mentioned before, and I worked with the engagement leads to ensure that I got those inputs from the business. One of the key SMEs who was, who worked for the sponsor, the GM, he was a key SME through the whole process, and it was a big ask of him to be dedicated to something for a year, but he was. His GM was very clear to him that this is your number one priority and do whatever it takes, block out your whole calendar basically for a year. And he was in quite a senior position as well. And he did that. And I remember because the process, had evolved and he started getting caught up again in the BAU and getting brought into, his regular work. And I remember talking to him and saying, you're my number one SME on this program. We're not going to be able to deliver in the time frame we're looking for without your 100% support. And I remember immediately he reset his calendar and prioritised the program again until we got to award. And then, that was another team that then started the transformation program. So again, I would reiterate, it came down to that there was organisational support, that this was one of the most important programs of work. And if something wasn't working, then it was communicated and it was resolved so that we could keep the momentum and the effectiveness of the program. Also, with the extensive scope and the due diligence that we undertook for over a year, it was also asking a lot from our suppliers that were invited into the RFP. They had dedicated a lot of their resources to work on the ongoing RFP process, and that included lots of different stages such as the clarifications process, proof of concepts, reference site checks, which are even across Australia, not just within Victoria, and negotiations. So I think we did our best to ensure that we were professional at all times and we respected their time and the demands that we were placing on them. And we stuck to the process that we would follow because we were all in it together. The suppliers were collaborating with us and we were all working pretty hard. So we did everything possible to respect the process for the suppliers and what they were going through. And if we asked for something, we were very clear what we were asking for, what we needed and what the timelines were, and the realistic timelines as well. And interestingly, some of those successful suppliers afterwards did say to me that they thought that the governance of the process was very strong and that if we said we would do something, that we did it and we stuck to our timeframes.
Great, thanks, Diana. And then I think through all of that strong process, great team, a lot of effort put in across multiple parts of the organisation, we really have delivered some outstanding results for the organisation, and we continue to kind of do that now. We're on our journey. We're about just over 50% of the way through our network transformation, where we're transforming all of the post offices and the connectivity across the nation. From that perspective, for us, leveraging NBN, our SD-WAN technology now in terms of being carrier agnostic on who we can choose, huge amounts of flexibility. What we've done is we've certainly future-proofed the network for the organisation. We've definitely reduced cost to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. Truly fantastic outcome from a procurement perspective. Probably one of the things that we've done that's really key is we've really simplified the management of the contracts. So even though we've gone from one contract to effectively 3 suppliers, so 3 contracts, but one that covers 2 towers essentially, we've really simplified the setup and the management of the contracts, the process by which we've got a really engaged network supplier. So they've and we can really see now the real value in terms of the simplicity of the arrangement we've got in place, and the strength of the work that went through the RFP process. We haven't had a huge amount of issues with regards to what was bid and now what's subsequently in the contracts to and is in the delivery piece. So inevitably there are always these kind of challenges around completing the process, and on the supplier side probably more than on our side, the sort of bid team moving away and then the run team from the supplier coming in. In our case, we've found it a pretty seamless operation. And what was key for us is that in the people that were involved in the process on the Australia Post side throughout the whole procurement activity are now the people that are also operating the contract or the contracts within the organisation. So everyone's got a lot of embedded knowledge and was part of the whole process, and so understood what was originally assessed and evaluated and is now sort of being executed from a contract perspective. Certainly supporting business growth is a strong aspect, and flexibility. We have really seen the value of what we did doing this pre-COVID. The timing was exceptional because we've been able to scale and stand up new facilities and scale out remote working, WebEx and those types of activities, much quicker than we could have done under our old setup. I mean, we've had to stand up 18 pop-up sites for the network processing. When I say network processing, I mean like our parcels and our e-commerce business, which is obviously, you would have seen like 150% plus growth in certain areas. It's the growth is huge, and so the capacity constraints on the network are massive. And so being able to stand up like connected sites quickly and efficiently is critical at the moment for us. And the flexibility to sort of put 2,500 plus people from head office onto WebEx in 3 days and ask them all to go work from home, contact centers to work remotely as well. It's been truly phenomenal in terms of what we've been able to achieve. And I think, Diana, you've got a few more points as well regarding the success pieces of the project.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, the Australia Post executives fully supported the best outcomes for Australia Post. There were several suppliers that the leadership team probably hadn't heard of before, so it was a process of them feeling assured of the recommendations, and there was extensive due diligence to ensure that there was comfort there. We gave every supplier in the process the opportunity to demonstrate what they could do through their RFP responses, their presentations of proof of concepts, reference site visits. But I'm really proud of the outcome and the recommendations, and I was confident that it was the best outcome for Australia Post. The recommendations were game-changing from a supplier and a technology perspective. And it was, given the amount of effort that was involved over the year and the outcome, I remember the tears flowing when the recommendation was endorsed by the board between myself and the key business sponsors. And I think they were tears from the effort, but tears that we were happy with. We thought it was the best outcome for Australia Post. And I remember also when we announced the outcome for each service tower in person to the down-selected suppliers, and the Chief Operating Officer flew down from Sydney to deliver those messages with the Chief Information Officer. And I was there, and Rob was there, and the GM, the business sponsor, were there. And it wasn't good news for all the parties that attended that day, but it was done in person at least, and it was delivered by a very senior leadership team. And it was done as soon as we had the approvals. And I remember some glassy eyes from some of those vendors after what they'd been through as well. And I know they did a lot of celebrating afterwards. So it has been over a year since the services were awarded, and there's been a huge transformation piece of work that's been taking place. But for me, it's rewarding to hear that things are going well, that we're hitting our milestones. The outcomes have been as we've expected, and everything's working well. So, you know, it is an important transformation piece of work for Australia Post, and I'm glad that the right outcome was made for Australia Post to continue to support its growth and its operational improvement strategies.
Thanks, Diana. What I'd like to do now is just talk a little bit about the CIPS submission and what really we did in terms of looking at that and why we think or why we feel we were successful. So putting the submission together, one of the key things that we really did, and I can't probably reiterate this enough, is to follow the template and the format that CIPS give you. It really, the Australia Post has participated in the CIPS Awards for a number of years, and so I think we were probably fortunate that we've had some success in the past, and therefore we had some sort of historical kind of content to fall back on in terms of structure. But I would say following the structure that CIPS provide is really beneficial to your submission, and making sure that you really sort of you read it, you get other people to read it. I mean, we almost had a little mini procurement team where we would bounce this off other heads of procurement or the GM of procurement, and we'd be really clear about, does this make sense? What do we think this looks like? Is it are we getting our message across? You know, have we hit what the titles that CIPS is looking for from a submission perspective? Probably the hardest area that I found in terms of putting the submission together is the innovation and creativity. It really does. You have to really think about it, and you have to really dig into the process. And bearing in mind, we'd run a process over like nearly 2 years. Some of the content, it takes a little bit of research and a little bit of digging. And I only joined Australia Post sort of 6 to 8 months into that process. So there were some elements of the front end that I hadn't been part of. So you do have to do a bit of research, and I made use of board packs or steering committee packs that we'd submitted, and so there was a lot of information that was able to be gleaned from those packs in terms of the early part of the setup to get an understanding of what was done. And then I think, touching on the obviously the best practice and the benefits you've achieved, if you've got great benefits that are really well substantiated, which we had, that's a real kind of demonstration of the value of the project. So that really helped. And then we were fortunate that we had a lot of media about the program and about the award. Obviously, Australia Post is a national organisation. It's very high profile. We've got a great brand. So the decisions we'd made about the technology that we were going with, and the fact that we were moving away from a major player in the telco market to some more, I guess, not niche players, but certainly sort of, wouldn't be seen necessarily as a tier one in this space, drew a lot of interest from the market, and so generated a lot of media coverage. And we were really fortunate. Our CIO was out in the media, and he was really we prepared a number of media releases before we did the awards so that we were clear to people what we were doing, and we knew what our talking points were. And that also helped the submission, I feel, because it really sort of showed the scale of what we were undertaking, and the scale of the process that we'd gone through to get there. So yeah, those would be the top tips I think I'd have for the submission.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you both, Robin and Diana, for walking us through your journey. We've got certainly a lot of interest from the audience, and I think we'll get straight into the Q&A. There's a lot of notes that I've personally taken, and it'd be great to delve deeper into some of the areas. The first question from Vasant is asking, what type of activities did you use to collate the requirements both from a technological perspective and a channel perspective at the start of the project?
Yeah, well, I think, do you want to start, Rob?
Oh, you start, Diana, because you were right there at the front end. So,
yeah, there were a lot of requirements across each service tower, and we had business analysts that were dedicated to that task. They consulted with all the relevant areas of the business. So, for example, for networks, they consulted with retail, with technology. There were several areas where they sought input. So they drafted a lot of requirements and continued to consult and work through and finalise those with all of those teams. So yeah, it did go through a lot of iterations, that process. The requirements were extensive. It went on for months, that process. And even before that, before when the RFI was done to identify who we wanted to approach for the RFP, those pain points were identified and what the objectives were. So that helped to build on the requirements, which were more the detailed, granular level of what was done next. So yeah, I guess in essence, it was a lot of consultation, a lot of reviewing with all the parties and all across the business, across Australia, for those requirements, and getting them to sign off before they were issued as part of the RFP.
And look, the only thing I'd add to that is that obviously we had a very comprehensive and complex contract in the first instance as well. So we weren't creating and crafting from scratch. We knew what the evolution of that contract needed to be, and we knew the new technology, essentially the revolution part, I guess, of it as well, needed to be. And so we had a baseline with which to start with. So it wasn't like everything was pulled together from scratch.
That's fantastic. And I imagine, requirements that basically affect many of the business area and required quite a complex approach. And the business case had to be comprehensive. But thank you for sharing that. Canute from New Zealand is asking, what system did you use for evaluating, for managing more 30 plus evaluators, as you mentioned, and how did those systems perform?
That's a good question. I'm happy to start answering that one. It was, although we have a source-to-pay system, we had to adapt the process to suit, given the number of requirements. We had so many different evaluators. We had a lot of different stages. So we actually used, I guess, our database management or SharePoint system as one of those key systems, because there was a lot of data and there were various levels of access that were provided to each of those evaluators. And we used that in parallel with our source-to-pay system as needed. But we did find that, given that many evaluators, that many requirements, sometimes there was a limitation with using a source-to-pay system when it got to that next level of detail. So that's where we did use SharePoint quite a bit to then, we controlled the level of access, what was external, what was internal information, who had access to what, commercials were sensitive and, stored in a very secure area. So that enabled us to use, off-the-shelf tools like Excel to do a lot of that analysis. So that's a key way of how we managed all that data.
And I think the thing to look at when you're dealing with a project of this scale and complexity is it's not so much the system that you're going to use to manage that amount of evaluators, but the structure and the structure and the framework that you put around the different elements of the evaluation process that you need to deliver it. So in our business case, we'd already identified the towers that we were going to have as part of the go-to-market activity, and that were effectively up for bid. And then we were also able to, in that business case, identify all the SMEs and the key stakeholders for those particular towers. So one of the things we were able to do was very quickly see well, you know, is there an individual that's critical to the whole process? Is there people that are going to be overloaded? Who were and you know, and each tower was a kind of self-contained unit. So it was able to then feed up into a centralized kind of approach to assessing how all the towers were fitting into the overall program. So you've got to have that really kind of, the system itself in terms of the repositories of information and the ability to send documentation out and for people to conduct their evaluations and read that much content, it all needs to be disseminated and controlled. And so the only way to do that is to really have almost a process map and compartmentalize your evaluators and then feed that information back up. And you don't necessarily need a system to do that. You just need a really good overall map of how they all join together and the timing with which you've got to bring that to, I guess, the sort of pointy end of the stick of the evaluation phase.
That's a really good segue into the next question, which is, what were the key assessment criteria that you adopted to evaluate the bids?
Oh, wow. Well, there were... Where do I stop the list?
Just maybe highlight what was more important for you and what sort of like made a difference in the evaluation. I'd imagine there would be quite a few.
Yeah, I think given there were quite a few, I mean, all of the requirements were segmented, so they basically were categories of what those key criteria were. You know, networks, there were more the technical criteria, always on, the connectivity that we're after, contact centres were after, lots of options with the platform that would enable people to, you know, work from home or have the platform to give them all that functionality. Mobility, it was the usual, you know, related to provisioning of devices, doing that quickly, replacing those quickly, repairing. Operational, so operational and functional requirements were key. Security also, they were a very integral part of the process, so the security requirements were key. I would also say that the proof of concepts, we took those very seriously and they were a big part of the evaluation phase. You know, we demanded, you know, I guess we were quite demanding with what we asked for with those proof of concepts. We had a structure of what we wanted demonstrated and in what time frame. And, you know, we carefully evaluated how suppliers went about doing that and what the results were. So that was a very big, that was, I guess, a very big part, a very big criteria in our evaluation. The reference sites were also very important because we wanted to see that technology demonstrated and in place, and we were very specific about that. So that was a process of trying to get the right reference sites, even if it meant going to Queensland or getting to the right sites. So yeah, I think all those things, and then obviously commercials was a very big part of it, and we went through a process of clarifying, you know, as we went through some aspects where we were clearer, or what we needed all suppliers to come back to on a more defined level. The commercials were a very big part of it, obviously. So I think, and the due diligence was important with the suppliers, especially the ones that we weren't as familiar with. So it was, I guess, an even balance of what we were looking for across all those criteria. But I guess the last thing I'll say there is there was a minimum non-price criteria where we expected suppliers to get through to the next stages, and then the focus was on the commercials. So it was very important that that minimum was met through the response to the requirements, the reference sites, the proof of concepts, and the due diligence.
And look, there's one thing I'd like to add to this that I think was critical to the success of getting the result we did. You know, we had a lot of senior executives who were, it would be fair to say they were a little bit nervous about some of the recommendations coming out of the project team with regards to the commercials and what we were seeing as a team in regards to capability. You know, when you're going from a single, you know, national and global supplier to making recommendations to suggest that there's we should break up this contract and we should have more than one supplier, and that the benefits that are going to flow from that, etc., are going to be, huge for the organisation. That makes, quite rightly, I think, it makes people a little bit nervous. Like, are we making the right decision? It's a big decision to make. We're one of the biggest organisations with the largest retail network footprint in Australia. We're sort of asking executives to endorse a very big decision. And one of the keys to success of getting them on board was the executive presentations and the presentations that were done to them, or that were given to them by the suppliers through the process. So we involved them relatively, before we'd got obviously through the really serious down select process. So suppliers, they could see the suppliers, they could ask them questions. We could answer any of their concerns around risk and around transition, and really get them to understand, to some degree, the same journey that the RFP team had been on through their process of understanding capabilities and commercials, etc. And that was a really big, that was a really smart process to run, and it worked really well because there were certainly people, this had a big sort of shake up of the market when we made this decision, and we needed those executives to be really on board with it and supportive, because we knew they were going to be getting asked questions, or they were going to be getting phone calls. And so I think that was really critical. And like, if you're going to undertake a program of this size, it's very important to give those executives the kind of insight that they need to feel, the confidence that the decision is the right one.
Thank you for that. Could you talk a little bit about how you measure the benefit across the 3 different contracts, and is innovation still being delivered through supplier management at this stage?
Yeah, so with the so from a benefits perspective, we're constantly tracking the benefits from an organizational perspective, because the transformation journey is quite a long one, particularly on networks. We were able to very quickly switch over our contact center process, because the solution that we settled on effectively kind of removed a middle person and allowed us to engage directly with an end supplier. So the benefits on that were realized quite quickly, and they're tracked and they're constantly measured. And our benefits recognition across the enterprise, which is done in the sort of holistic way and through project management, is certainly measuring those benefits. We have commercial forums set up with the key suppliers in the business that have got the network transformation and our sort of mobility and comms and collab. So we're constantly able to see how they're performing against the transition targets that we've got set. Within the business unit of enterprise enablement, there's a business manager who's tracking what the business case said were the benefits versus the actuals that we're seeing. And that obviously in situations like COVID, where we've been impacted by our rollout timelines due to just inaccessibility to be able to move freely around the country to make changes and the like. All of those things are constantly being reviewed and balanced against, are we requiring more investment than we originally envisaged? Are we getting benefits? But that's being done at the business level, not procurement that's really doing that, because the program is the technology transformation. From an innovation perspective, I'd say the commercial forums and the innovation sort of funds and the approaches that we're taking, that's definitely helping drive continual improvement and innovation in the spaces that we're working on. We're even conducting, again, because there's so many layers to the service delivery, there are even sort of, the way we've broken it down, there are even mini kind of RFQs and activities of go-to-markets to even baseline some of the sub-services that come off of this. The key, I think, the response that we've had to COVID and our ability to stand up new services and our ability to, move to remote working and the speed at which we could do that, probably shows, is a testament to the quality of the work that was put in place and the innovation that's continuing to come through the contract. But it does take work, and it doesn't happen overnight, because in an environment as big as Post, where you've got a lot of BAU pressure, you've got to deliver day to day as well.
Right. We have another interesting question from Steve. Given the sort of the complexity of the sort of contract award requirement that you've asked of the suppliers, was there any funding that was provided for the front end work from the supplier, especially to demonstrate that capability piece? And if not, how confident are you that those suppliers will keep bidding for pieces of work that you put out there?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not aware that any funding was forthcoming. Diana, are you? I didn't think we funded any of this, other than to say this is the size of the prize, I guess.
No, basically, no, in terms of, funding before, I mean, there was a lot of due diligence that was undertaken, and, I'm sure that there was costs that were absorbed by suppliers in standing up these teams, these project teams that responded to the RFP over the year. And I'm sure there would have been costs associated with travel and the proof of concepts. But yeah, funding wasn't needed before award. We had done we were satisfied with the level of due diligence that we had done, apart from the project team funding and any other funding needed internally to make those award decisions.
Yeah, so I think the key on the supplier funding side, obviously, yeah, we don't normally sort of, it wouldn't have been a traditional kind of route for us to take, to say that we would sort of say maybe fund a POC or something with the supplier, but acknowledging the level of effort, we did certainly acknowledge the level of effort and work that they had to put in, and we were conscious very much of the ensuring that we demonstrated a similar level of effort back to them, but also making sure that the suppliers that got through, I guess, the down select process, so when they had to really invest in their bids, we made sure that we had good engagement, right up to executive level as well, so that our execs were informed of what was going on, and that we knew that they would be getting calls from these suppliers too. So we ensured that they were across where we were at, what was happening, but that also that the suppliers at least certainly felt like we were serious with all of them, and they were all in the mix right up until selection time. The funding question's an interesting one. I think that they would bid again. What we have done is actually, by deconstructing the contract that we had into the solutions that we got now, we've actually made it easier for us to go to market again for any of the tower services. We've made it less complex, which has put less onerous demands on the suppliers. So in some respects, actually, we've simplified it to the extent that actually it's a very low cost response for them. They should be in a position where they're responding to something that isn't new, that they have done before, that they've got collateral on. So investment from their perspective is all about how they go about winning business.
Thank you for that. Is there any team member that's still involved in the project that was originally or throughout the stages from the RFP that's currently involved in the contract management sort of areas? Because Steve is asking, that's usually an area of ambiguity from RFP to managing the contract.
There's actually, I'd reckon about 70%, Diana, wouldn't you say?
I would say so. Yeah, there were key members that were involved all the way through the evaluation and negotiation process, and some of them still today, they are attending those commercial forums. They are part of contract negotiations and discussions. They're very close to the services today. They're still close to the transformation program that's taking place. The service delivery leads that were involved throughout the evaluation and the requirements process, they are still very much involved today, because I guess they're sponsors of those services. The GM, who was a sponsor at the time, she's still a very key person in the overall transformation program. She's also quite heavily involved in the commercial discussions that Rob and I have with those providers. So yeah, I think I would say that, we work closely with the technology team, who a lot of them are still key members and across the contract discussions that take place now. And there were other people that came on board during the transformation phase. But yeah, I think Rob's right. Probably about 70% of the people are still involved on some level in the supplier dealings, in the programs of work that are taking place now.
Brilliant. And if we can wrap up the session with another good question that came through from Mohammed Ryan. What would you say, in your experience, and what you also recommend to everyone that's listening today, the key elements for good collaboration? If you had to look at your project and sort of do a summary, what were the key success factors that enable that project to be run so successfully?
You go first, Diana.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I think good collaboration means involving all of those relevant teams that have an interest, that are a stakeholder, and them being part of the journey, being brought into the process, listening to their feedback. I think the sponsors of the program need to understand that if something is an organisation-wide program, that it's not just their program, that it is all about meeting everyone's needs and fixing those pain points. I think the people side of it's very important. It's really important to make sure that a project like this is moving along well, that the people are working together. So I think those team dynamics, with the program team were important, and I was closely involved with them, but then also the way that they collaborated with the rest of the organisation. And I think the sponsors of the program listened to any feedback. If there were issues along the way, they addressed it. They made sure that the right people were always involved. And it did mean sometimes some difficult decisions if some people did need to perhaps roll off and other people roll on. And I think the key to success was that people, they were willing to get their hands dirty, be hands-on, do things that they probably wouldn't normally do in their role, but just to get, just to progress to the next stage and get the work done. And just also have a sense of humour while doing it, because, when something is such a big project like that, you still want to have fun and have fun with the team that you're working with.
Yeah, and I think I'd just like to say the key that I see is honesty, transparency and communication, and making sure there are no surprises, making sure you address any issues quickly, and that you deal with them fairly, and make sure that that you are not kind of, I guess, that you're not brushing things under the carpet, and live your organisational values through the program team, the project team as well. Those are really kind of key to being successful in collaborating, because ultimately it relies on individuals working together, and that's really what you need to work to. And we had a great team. They were fantastic. We were really lucky. Diana's brilliant, which is really lucky for me because it's easy to work with. Really, really happy with that. And hopefully that gives people a little bit of an insight, and thanks for listening to us.
It certainly did. It was a very insightful session. Thanks again for sharing your journey. And again, collaboration is key to not just project, but literally everything that we do across business. So I'd like to congratulate Rob and Diana and their team, along with the whole of Australia Post, for being successful in a very highly contested category at the award. And again, it's a recognition that's enabled by CIPS through the awards, but it's been effectively made by a forum of peers, which deemed the work that you did, highly worthy of recognition. So congratulations again. Before we wrap off, I'd like to encourage everyone to take the short survey. It gives us an improvement opportunity for us to better cater to your needs. And closing off, just want to mention a few webinars that are coming up in the next few days. So we have the part 2 of our Women Leaders in Procurement and Supply series on the 23rd at 12 noon, Australian Eastern Standard, and that was focused on difficult conversation. And then following that, we have on the 24th of September, a bit of fun activity. The CIPS Victorian branch is hosting a virtual trivia event, and we'll have breakout rooms and a bit of fun just to keep the engagement lighthearted, if you wish. And then we're going to close off that's going to be at 4:30 Australian Eastern Standard. Then we're going to close off the week with a very important theme, certainly very close to CIPS's heart, which is Unchained Modern Slavery, currently sponsored by Inform 365, and that's on Friday, the 25th at 12 noon Australia time. Once again, a very warm thank you to all of you that were in attendance. Huge thank you to Rob and Diana for sharing their story, and congratulations again on your success. We look forward to welcoming you to upcoming webinar. We'll have more of this Best in Procurement series, and until then, wish you all a lovely day and a nice weekend ahead. Thank you for joining us.